I still remember the taste of champagne turning bitter in my mouth as my entire world collapsed around me. 20 minutes earlier, everyone had been raising their glasses to my 7 years of dedication at Nexus Defense Systems. Now, I stood, frozen as Harrison Pierce, our department head, announced to the room full of my colleagues that I was being separated from the company, effective immediately. The irony wasn't lost on me, being fired at my own promotion party with congratulatory balloons still floating above our heads. When I joined Nexus after my 12 years in the Marine Corps, I brought with me the discipline, leadership, and strategic thinking that had served me well as a communications intelligence specialist. Military life had taught me to weather storms with dignity, but nothing prepared me for this particular ambush. Harrison had always been cold, calculating, and deeply insecure, but I never imagined he'd go this far. That morning had started like a dream. I'd woken up early, chosen my navy blue suit carefully, the one my late father, also a Marine, had helped me pick out when I first interviewed at Nexus. "Command the room, Morgan," he'd said. "You've navigated war zones. The corporate world should be a cakewalk." If only he could see me now, champagne soaking into the carpet at my feet as Harrison's words hung in the air like poison. "Morgan's position has been deemed redundant following our recent acquisition," Harrison continued, his voice steady but his eyes avoiding mine. "Let's use this gathering to wish her well in her future endeavors." The conference room fell silent. Faces that moments before had been congratulating me now stared at their shoes or phones. 7 years of building the company's cybersecurity division from the ground up, securing government contracts worth millions, mentoring junior team members, all erased with a few carefully chosen corporate words. I scanned the room, catching sympathetic glances from a few brave souls. Zoe from finance looked horrified. David from legal was already typing furiously on his phone, but most just stood there, paralyzed by the sudden shift from celebration to execution. "I'd like a moment to gather my things," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Those years of military briefings under pressure were paying off now, and I'll need this explained in writing, Harrison." He nodded curtly, relieved I wasn't causing a scene. "Of course. HR has prepared the paperwork. You'll find it reasonable." Reasonable. As if being ambushed at what was supposed to be my celebration could ever be reasonable. I walked out with my head high, feeling the weight of eyes on my back. The corridor to my office seemed longer than usual, each step requiring more effort than the last. My mind raced through possible explanations: budget cuts, personality conflicts, or something more sinister. The truth had to be related to Project Sentinel, the major defense contract I'd been leading, worth over $50 million to Nexus. We were in final negotiations, and I was the primary point of contact with the Pentagon. Harrison had been oddly interested in taking over those calls recently, asking questions about my relationships with the military procurement team. As I packed my desk, I noticed my security clearance badge had already been deactivated. They'd planned this meticulously. My hand hovered over the framed photo of my unit from my last deployment, brothers and sisters who had taught me that true leadership meant having integrity, especially when it was inconvenient. Outside, the autumn air hit my face like a wake-up call. I'd given this company everything, missed holidays, worked through a serious shoulder injury that still troubled me from my service days, postponed starting the family I'd always wanted. For what? To be discarded when it suited Harrison Pierce's agenda? I drove home in silence, no radio, no calls, just the steady rhythm of raindrops on the windshield matching my heartbeat. My apartment felt foreign when I arrived, too quiet, too empty. I placed my box of belongings on the kitchen counter and stared at the congratulatory card my team had signed that morning. "To our fearless leader," it read, "the heart and soul of Nexus Cybersecurity." That night, sleep evaded me. I lay awake, replaying every recent interaction, searching for clues I might have missed. Harrison had been increasingly territorial about Sentinel, insisting on joining calls he'd previously ignored, requesting copies of all documentation. There was something off about the timing, just 3 weeks before the contract was set to close. The first light of dawn was creeping through my blinds when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then military instinct kicked in. In the field, unexpected communications could be crucial intelligence. Morgan Wright, I answered, voice professional despite my exhaustion. Morgan, it's Eleanor Vance. My breath caught. Eleanor Vance, CEO of Arteron Systems, the parent, company that had acquired Nexus 6 months ago. We'd met briefly during the transition, but never spoken directly since. Ms. Vance, this is unexpected. I imagine so, especially after yesterday's events. I need to speak with you urgently, in person. There's been a situation with the Sentinel. Contract. My heart raced. I'm no longer with Nexus, as of yesterday. I'm well aware, she replied, her voice taut with something that sounded like controlled anger. That's precisely why we need to talk. How soon can you meet me? I met Eleanor Vance at a private dining room in the Westridge Hotel, far from the Nexus offices and prying eyes. She'd chosen the location for its discretion, requesting I enter through the service entrance to avoid being seen. When I arrived, she was already seated at a small table by the window, a portfolio open before her. At 58, Eleanor radiated the calm authority that came from decades building Arteron from a small defense contractor into a technological powerhouse. Her silver hair was pulled back in a precise bun, and her dark suit spoke of power without needing to announce it. Morgan, she said, rising to shake my hand, thank you for coming on such short notice. Curiosity is a powerful motivator, I replied, taking the seat across from her. That? And I suddenly have a very open calendar. She didn't smile. What happened yesterday was not authorized. Harrison Pierce acted without board approval or my knowledge. I only learned about your termination 3 hours ago when the Pentagon called me directly. The quiet assurance in her voice made me sit straighter. The Pentagon called you about me? Colonel Ramirez specifically. He was quite disturbed to learn that the person who had been quarterbacking the Sentinel project was suddenly gone. He suggested that without your involvement, the Pentagon might need to reconsider the contract altogether. Colonel Ramirez and I had served together in my final deployment. He'd been the one who encouraged me to consider Nexus when I transitioned to civilian life, knowing they needed someone who understood military communication systems from the inside. Over the years, our professional relationship had been the cornerstone of several successful contracts. Harrison told everyone my position was redundant after the acquisition, I said, watching her face carefully. Eleanor's expression hardened. Nothing could be further from the truth. Your department has the highest performance metrics in the company. The board sees your veteran-led team as a model for our other divisions. She slid a document across the table. This is what Harrison submitted to HR yesterday morning to justify your termination. I scanned the page, my military training helping me maintain a neutral expression despite the growing anger inside me. The document cited unsatisfactory performance, insubordination, and most shockingly, security concerns regarding classified information handling. These are lies, I said, my voice low but firm. I've maintained perfect security protocols. Every classified document has been handled according to both Pentagon and company regulations. I know, Eleanor replied, which is why I spent the night reviewing every security log, email, and performance review associated with your name. What I found instead was a pattern of Harrison attempting to access files he wasn't cleared for, specifically the technical specifications for Sentinels, encryption modules, files only you and your direct team have authorization to view. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. The encryption specifications are what makes Sentinel valuable. If someone wanted to sell that technology, exactly. And Harrison has been meeting with representatives from Meridian Systems, our direct competitor. I leaned back, processing this information. Meridian had been aggressively pursuing military contracts for years, always coming up short against Nexus's superior technology. If they somehow acquired our proprietary encryption algorithms, they could undercut us on pricing while offering similar capabilities. You think he's planning to leak classified technology to a competitor? Eleanor's eyes met mine. I think he already has. But without access to your secure files, he couldn't give them the complete package. That's why he needed you gone, to justify reassigning your security clearances to himself as department head. But why fire me so publicly? Why not just reassign me? Because he needed to discredit you, she said simply. If questions arose later about missing information, he wanted a paper trail suggesting you were the problem. A disgruntled ex-employee makes a convenient scapegoat. The calculated nature of it made my blood run cold. I'd faced enemy combatants, with more honor than Harrison Pierce. What do you need from me? I asked, military pragmatism taking over. First, I need to confirm what may have already been compromised. Second, I need your help securing what remains. And third, she paused, studying me carefully. I need someone I can trust to clean up this mess at Nexus. I don't work there anymore, I reminded her. That can be rectified immediately. I sipped the water in front of me, buying time to think. I appreciate the offer, Eleanor, but returning to a company that just publicly humiliated me doesn't seem appealing, even with Harrison gone. I understand completely, which is why I'm not offering you your old position back. She closed her portfolio with a decisive snap. The board held an emergency meeting at 5 a.m. this morning. We voted unanimously to remove Harrison as department head, effective immediately. But we need someone to take his place. Someone who understands the technology, has the necessary security clearances, and most importantly, someone the Pentagon trusts implicitly. My pulse quickened. You're offering me Harrison's job. I'm offering you more than that, Eleanor said, sliding a second document across the table. This is a board resolution, already signed. It creates a new position, Chief Security Officer of Nexus Defense Systems, reporting directly to me. No intermediaries, no bureaucracy. Complete autonomy over all classified contracts and security protocols. I skimmed the document, noting the substantial salary increase and equity grant. But one detail made me look up sharply. This gives me authority to audit all communications between any Nexus employee and external entities. Eleanor nodded. We need to know how deep this goes. Harrison may not be acting alone. The strategic part of my brain, the part trained to assess battlefield situations quickly, recognized the opportunity. But the wounded part, still raw from yesterday's humiliation, hesitated. Why me? You have other qualified people. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. Because in addition to your technical qualifications, you've demonstrated something rare in this industry, Morgan. Integrity. Even yesterday, being ambushed as you were, you maintained your composure and professionalism. That's the kind of leadership Nexus needs, especially now. I spent the weekend preparing for battle, something I hadn't done since my final deployment. This time, my weapons were digital forensics tools, contract clauses, and the complete access Eleanor had granted me to Nexus's secure systems. From my home office, I methodically traced Harrison's digital footprints through the company network, uncovering a disturbing pattern of late-night access to classified Sentinel files and encrypted communications with external emails, addresses. I soon traced back to Meridian Systems executives. The sheer arrogance was stunning. Harrison had been careful enough to hide his tracks from casual observation, but he clearly never anticipated someone with my specialized military intelligence background would be examining his activities. My years tracking digital communications for the Marines had taught me to spot anomalies that civilian security teams often missed. By Sunday evening, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier documenting not just data breaches, but apparent financial incentives. An offshore account in Harrison's name had received 3 substantial deposits, coinciding with his meetings with Meridian. He thought himself clever using a shell company in the Caymans, but he'd used his mother's maiden name in the paperwork. Amateur tradecraft at best. "You've got enough to refer this to the FBI," Eleanor said during our secure video call that evening. "This isn't just corporate espionage, it's a national security issue." "We will," I assured her, "but not yet. If we move too soon, we won't know who else is involved. Harrison might be the face of this, but someone had to authorize his access. Privileges. No department head gets that kind of system clearance without approval from above." Eleanor's expression tightened. "You think the breach goes higher?" "I think we need to be certain before we make accusations. The military had taught me that incomplete intelligence could be more dangerous than none at all. Give me 1 week inside, operating as CSO. Let me trace all the connections before we bring in federal authorities." She nodded reluctantly. 1 week? But Morgan, be careful. If Harrison suspects you're investigating him, he won't, I said with quiet confidence. He thinks he's already won. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear. I dressed with purpose, charcoal suit, white shirt, and the antique gold compass pin my father had worn throughout his own military career. Always know your true north. He'd told me when he'd pinned it on my uniform before my first deployment. I needed that reminder today. The Nexus headquarters lobby fell silent as I strode through security. The guard's eyes widened as he processed my new credentials. "Welcome back, Ms. Wright," he stammered, clearly confused. "Thank you, Eddie," I replied, remembering his name as I always had. Small details matter in building loyalty. The elevator ride to the executive floor gave me time to center myself. When the doors opened, I was greeted by Marissa, Harrison's executive assistant, whose shocked expression quickly morphed into confusion. "Morgan? What are you—" "I wasn't told you'd be returning." "There's been a change in leadership," I said, calmly, handing her the official memo Eleanor had prepared. "I'll be taking over Harrison's responsibilities, effective immediately. Could you please call a department head's meeting for 10 a.m. in the main conference room?" Her eyes scanned the document, widening as she processed its implications. "Yes, of course, but Mr. Pierce is already in his office. He has a meeting scheduled with the Pentagon liaison in 30 minutes. Cancel it," I said firmly. "And please inform the liaison that I'll be in touch to reschedule later today." "Should I tell Mr. Pierce you're here?" I smiled slightly. "No need. I'll tell him myself." Harrison's office door was closed, but I could see him through the glass wall, his back to the entrance as he spoke on the phone. I didn't knock. As CSO, I now outranked him. I opened the door just in time to hear him say, "The technical specs will be ready by Wednesday. Nexus won't know what's missing until it's too late." He turned at the sound of the door, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and finally, poorly disguised panic. "Morgan," he managed, quickly ending his call. "This area is restricted to current employees only. I'll have to ask you to leave before I call security." I closed the door behind me. "That won't be necessary, Harrison. I am a current employee." I placed Eleanor's official authorization on his desk. "As of 8 a.m. this morning, I'm the new Chief Security Officer of Nexus Defense Systems, a position that, unfortunately for you, includes complete audit authority over all communications with outside entities, particularly those regarding classified military technology." The blood drained from his face, though he quickly attempted to recover. "This is some kind of joke. I spoke with HR on Friday. Your termination was processed." "It was rescinded," I replied calmly, taking a seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. The board felt it was premature, especially given my central role in the Sentinel project. His eyes narrowed. "Eleanor Vance put you up to this. She's overstepping her authority. As CEO of our parent company, reviewing the unexplained termination of key security personnel falls well within her authority. particularly when that termination coincides with unauthorized access to classified military encryption algorithms, or DAS. Just a moment. Genuine fear flashed across Harrison's face before he masked it with corporate blandness. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but any access I've had to company systems has been completely authorized and appropriate, including your 2 a.m. sessions copying technical specifications, or perhaps your encrypted communications with Marcus Ellison at Meridian Systems. I kept my voice level, letting the precision of my information do the work. The Pentagon takes a dim view of selling military secrets, Harrison, as does the FBI. He stood abruptly. You're making serious accusations without evidence. I suggest you leave before you say something that constitutes defamation. I remained seated, projecting the calm confidence I'd learned in countless high-pressure military situations. I have the evidence. Every file access, every communication, every offshore deposit. The only question remaining is whether you were acting alone or under direction. Harrison's composure crumbled visibly, his carefully constructed corporate mask slipping to reveal the cornered man beneath. He glanced at his phone, then toward the door, calculating his options in real time. You have no idea what you're involved in, he finally said, his voice lower now, almost conspiratorial. This goes beyond Nexus, beyond even Arteron. There are national interests at stake. Spare me the national security theater, I replied, leaning forward slightly. I spent 12 years in military intelligence. I know the difference between serving country and serving self. I tapped my finger on the edge of his desk. The deposits to your Cayman account weren't patriotic donations. His eyes widened fractionally. A tell. He hadn't expected me to know about the money. Morgan, listen. He tried again, switching tactics with the desperation of a drowning man grasping at floating debris. We could work together on this. There's room for both of us to benefit. The Sentinel project is worth hundreds of millions. The specifications alone are classified under federal law, I interrupted. The penalties for sharing them include prison time, not some minimum security retreat for white-collar criminals, but a federal penitentiary. I let that sink in before continuing. Now, I have a department meeting to prepare for. You have 30 minutes to clear your personal items from this office. You can't just, I can and I am. Security will escort you out at 9:30. Any company property removed will be considered theft and handled accordingly. Harrison's face flushed, deep red. This isn't over, Morgan. You think you've won because Eleanor's backing you today, but boards change their minds, especially when presented with new information. I recognized the veiled threat, but remained impassive. Threatening a former Marine rarely ends well, Harrison. I've survived actual war zones. Corporate intimidation doesn't quite measure up. Stood to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing. That call you were on when I walked in, the one about delivering specifications by Wednesday, that line has been monitored since 6 a.m. The FBI has already been provided with a transcript. It was a calculated bluff. We hadn't actually involved federal authorities yet, but the effect was immediate. Harrison sank into his chair, suddenly looking years older. As I walked through the executive suite toward what would now be my office, I felt eyes following me from every direction. News travels fast in corporate environments, perhaps even faster than in military units. Already the whispers had begun. Marissa was on the phone, speaking urgently in hushed tones. 2 other executive assistants huddled near the coffee machine, their conversation stopping abruptly as I passed. Let them talk, I thought. Perception would be crucial in the coming days. My new office was 3 doors down from Harrison's, larger, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and the harbor beyond. It had previously belonged to the VP of Operations who had retired during the Arteron acquisition. The space was sparsely furnished, but featured a burnished oak desk that commanded the room. I set down my laptop case and took a moment to gather myself. Within minutes, Marissa appeared at my door, her professional demeanor firmly back in place despite the obvious questions in her eyes. "The meeting is set for 10 a.m., Ms. Wright. All department heads have confirmed except Dr. Lawson from R&D, who's at a conference in Tokyo. He'll join remotely." "Thank you, Marissa. And it's still just Morgan." She nodded, but remained in the doorway. "There's something else you should know. After you spoke with Mr. Pierce, he made 3 calls. One to his attorney, one to Richard Blackwood on the Arteron board, and one to someone he referred to only as the General." My interest sharpened. "You heard these calls?" "Just his side of the first 2. The third he took in the private conference room, but he seemed agitated afterward." Her loyalty was clearly shifting with the winds of power, a common phenomenon in corporate politics, but useful at the moment. "Richard Blackwood," I repeated, filing the name away. "And this General, any idea who that might be?" "No, but Mr. Pierce has had several meetings blocked out in his calendar with just G as the identifier. No location, no dial-in details. This was potentially significant. A military connection could explain how Harrison had gained access to classified systems beyond his clearance level. I made a mental note to search for any retired generals with connections to either Nexus or Meridian. "Marissa, I'll need access to Harrison's complete calendar for the past 6 months, along with any notes or meeting minutes you have." "Of course. I'll have everything transferred to your system immediately." She hesitated again. "Should I continue as your assistant, or would you prefer to bring in someone else?" It was a fair question. Marissa had been Harrison's right hand for 3 years. Her loyalty couldn't be guaranteed, but her knowledge of operations would be invaluable. "I'd like you to stay on," I decided. "Your experience will be essential during this transition." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you. I'll make sure you have everything you need." As she turned to leave, I added, "And Marissa, I value transparency above all else. If Harrison contacts you, or if anyone pressures you about our operations, I expect to be informed immediately." She nodded, her expression solemn. "Understood." Alone again, I turned to the window, gazing out at the harbor where Navy ships occasionally docked, a sight that always gave me a strange comfort, despite my complicated relationship with military service. My discharge had been honorable, but had come after I'd filed reports about mishandled intelligence that certain commanders had preferred to ignore. The parallels to my current situation weren't lost on me. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Board meeting moved to 2 p.m. today. Blackwood requesting your presence. Be prepared." So Harrison had already activated his allies on the board. It was happening faster than I'd anticipated, but not unexpectedly. In both military and corporate warfare, the first counterattack often reveals the enemy's true strength and strategy. I had less than an hour before facing the department heads, the people who had watched in silence as I was humiliated at my own promotion party just 3 days ago. Then, a board meeting where at least one member was already aligned against me. Welcome back to Nexus, indeed. The main conference room at Nexus had always struck me as unnecessarily theatrical. A long, dark wood table surrounded by high-backed, leather chairs with the company's achievements displayed in glass cases along one wall like museum artifacts. As I entered precisely at 10 a.m., 7 department heads were already seated, their expressions ranging from open curiosity to barely concealed hostility. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," I began, taking the chair at the head of the table, Harrison's usual seat. "I recognize this is unexpected, so I'll be direct. As of this morning, I've been appointed Chief Security Officer of Nexus Defense Systems, reporting directly to CEO Eleanor Vance. Harrison Pierce is no longer with the company." The silence that followed was deafening until Vivian Chen, our Chief Financial Officer, leaned forward. "While I'm surprised to see you back, Morgan, this is highly irregular. Board protocol requires notification of executive changes at least 48 hours in advance." Under normal circumstances, yes, I acknowledged. These circumstances are not normal. We have evidence of a significant security breach involving classified military technology. The board made an emergency decision to protect both the company and our government contracts. What kind of security breach? Asked James Hoffman, head of manufacturing. His tone was neutral, but his eyes were sharp. James and I had worked closely on several projects. He had been one of the few to look genuinely distressed at my public firing. I met his gaze directly. Intelligence suggests that proprietary encryption, algorithms from Project Sentinel have been compromised. Specifically, portions of the technology have been offered to Meridian Systems. The reaction was immediate. Sharp intakes of breath, exchanged glances. Sentinel represented not just millions in immediate revenue, but potentially billions in long-term defense contracts. Its compromise threatened Nexus's very future. That's a serious accusation, said Thomas Reed, legal counsel. Do you have actionable evidence? Sufficient evidence to warrant immediate intervention and a full investigation, I replied carefully. Until that investigation is complete, all access to Sentinel files will require direct authorization from my office. All communications regarding the project will be monitored. This isn't negotiable. And Harrison? Asked Diane Foster, VP of Human Resources. What exactly are we telling the staff? That he's no longer with the company, effective immediately. Nothing more at this stage. Thomas leaned forward, his attorney's instincts obviously triggered. If there's potential legal exposure here, the board should have informed the legal department first. We need to manage this carefully to avoid liability. The board authorized this approach specifically, Thomas, I countered. This isn't about liability. It's about national security. But rest assured, you'll be fully involved in the next steps. The tension in the room was palpable as each person processed what this meant for their departments, their projects, and potentially their own positions if they had been close to Harrison. I needed to establish control quickly before factions could form. I understand this is disruptive, I continued, softening my tone slightly. But I need each of you to work with me, not against me. Your departments will continue operating as normal, with two exceptions. First, all classified projects will undergo immediate security audits. Second, any staff who had direct access to Sentinel specifications will be interviewed individually. That's half my engineering team, protested Rajiv Patel, our engineering director. It will bring development to a standstill. Not if we move efficiently, I replied. My team will work around the clock if necessary. The sooner we contain this breach, the sooner we can return to normal operations. Vivian, who had been studying me intently, finally spoke again. This is all very dramatic, Morgan, but there's still the question of authority. Many of us report directly to the board, not to a newly created CSO position. With respect, I'm not comfortable restructuring financial reporting protocols without written directives from the board itself. It was a direct challenge, and one I had anticipated. Vivian had been Harrison's closest ally in the executive team. I retrieved a folder from my briefcase and slid copies of Eleanor's authorization around the table. The board resolution creating my position and outlining temporary emergency protocols, I explained. You'll note it's signed by the full board, including all 3 members of the audit committee. The financial oversight provisions are specifically addressed on page 3, Vivian. As they reviewed the documents, I observed their reactions carefully. Most showed the expected mix of surprise and reluctant acceptance. But Thomas and Vivian exchanged a glance that immediately set off warning bells in my mind. It was brief, barely a second, but in that look I recognized calculation, not concern. I have one more question, said Kyle Martinez, marketing director, who had been conspicuously quiet until now. Why you, Morgan? With all due respect, military background aside, cybersecurity hasn't been your primary focus here. It was a fair question, though the subtle undermining wasn't lost on me. because I'm the only senior person with both the technical understanding of Sentinel and the security clearance to access all compartmentalized aspects of the project. And perhaps more importantly, I'm the only one the Pentagon has explicitly stated they'll continue working with on this technology. That silenced further objections, at least temporarily. The mention of Pentagon support was both true and strategically valuable. No one at the table wanted to appear to be obstructing a matter of military importance. We'll need your full cooperation moving forward, I concluded, standing to signal the meeting's end. My door is open for individual concerns, but our priority must be securing Sentinel and protecting this company's future. I expect daily department updates until we've contained the situation. As they filed out, I caught fragments of whispered conversations, some concerned, some speculative. Office politics was inevitable, but I needed to focus on the real threats. Harrison might be temporarily neutralized, but his allies remained. Both inside Nexus and beyond, Marissa was waiting for me when I returned to my office. Richard Blackwood called again. He's insisting on meeting you before the board session. He suggested lunch at the Harbor Club at noon. A private meeting before the official board confrontation. Classic intimidation tactic. Tell him I'm available. For a brief coffee at 11:30 in the executive dining room. Not the Harbor Club. Keeping the meeting on my territory was a small power move, but in corporate warfare, perception was often as important as reality. I had learned that in the military as well. Sometimes the appearance of confidence deterred challenges more effectively than actual force. Also, Marissa added, I've found something interesting in Harrison's calendar. Every third Thursday. For the past 4 months, he's had breakfast meetings at the Westfield Hotel with someone identified only as GB. No other details, except they're always scheduled for 6:30 a.m. GB, I repeated. Could be our general. That's what I thought. And there's one more thing. The last meeting was 2 days before the incident at your promotion party. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Whatever Harrison had been planning, it had been coordinated with this mysterious military contact just before he moved against me. Thank you, Marissa. That's excellent work, she smiled, seemingly pleased by the acknowledgement. The Westfield keeps visitor logs for their restaurant. I still have a friend in their events department from when we used to hold the annual retreats there. I nodded appreciatively. Marissa was proving to be a valuable ally, whether out of genuine support or simple self-preservation remained to be seen. As she left, my secure phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor. Blackwood has requested executive session at today's board meeting. You excluded. I've denied it, but he's gathering support. Approach with caution. The battle lines were being drawn more clearly now. I had perhaps a few hours before the board meeting to gather whatever additional intelligence I could find. Starting with Richard Blackwood and working backward to this mysterious general. In military operations, I'd learned that the most dangerous enemies aren't always on the front lines. Sometimes they're in the command tent, making decisions that send others into harm's way while keeping their own hands clean. Richard Blackwood arrived 15 minutes early to our meeting. Another subtle power play I recognized immediately. He stood as I entered the executive dining room, his silver-streaked hair immaculately styled, his handshake firm and slightly too prolonged. At 62, Blackwood had the polished confidence of old money combined with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to bending situations to his advantage. Morgan Wright, he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I've heard a great deal about you, though we've never had the pleasure of meeting directly. The acquisition hasn't afforded many opportunities for interaction with the board, I replied, taking the seat across from him. The executive dining room was nearly empty at this hour, but I'd chosen a table in the center of the room where our conversation would be visible to anyone passing by. No appearance of secretive dealings. Quite right, Blackwood agreed, smoothly signaling for coffee. Though circumstances have certainly accelerated our introduction. Extraordinary measures for extraordinary times, wouldn't you say? His tone was pleasant, but the subtext was clear. He viewed Eleanor's intervention and my appointment as an overreach. Protecting classified military technology seems worth extraordinary measures, I countered, accepting the coffee placed before me. The Sentinel project represents the future of Nexus. Indeed it does. Blackwood stirred his coffee methodically. Though I wonder if a security breach, however concerning, warrants such a dramatic restructuring without full board consultation. Some might view it as an excessive reaction, and others might view selling military secrets to competitors as treason, I replied evenly, which tends to warrant decisive action. His expression never changed, but I noted the slight tightening around his eyes. Strong allegations require strong evidence, Ms. Wright. As a veteran, you understand the importance of a proper chain of command and due process. There it was, the subtle emphasis on my military background, positioned as a potential liability rather than an asset, suggesting that I might have overstepped proper corporate channels out of some misplaced military zeal. I understand the importance of protecting American interests and company assets, Mr. Blackwood. The evidence warranting Harrison's removal was reviewed by Eleanor and the board chair. Not the full board, he corrected smoothly. A procedural distinction that some members find troubling. I leaned forward slightly. I'm curious. How long have you known Harrison Pierce? Your relationship seems to predate the acquisition. The question clearly caught him off guard, though he recovered quickly. We've served on various industry committees together. Defense contractors operate in rather small circles, as I'm sure you've observed. And would those circles include retired military personnel? Generals, perhaps? His coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Many defense executives have military backgrounds. It's the nature of the industry. Of course, I agreed. I'm particularly interested in connections to General Bernard Garfield. Does that name mean anything to you? I was taking a calculated risk. During the brief interval before our meeting, I'd had Marissa cross-reference the initials GB with retired military leaders connected to defense contracting. Bernard Garfield had emerged as the most likely candidate, a recently retired Air Force general who now served on several corporate boards, including one that interfaced regularly with Meridian Systems. Blackwood's micro-expression, a fleeting widening of the eyes, confirmed my suspicion before he could mask it. General Garfield is respected throughout the defense community, he said carefully, though I don't see his relevance to our current situation. That's interesting because Harrison seemed to find him quite relevant enough for regular private meetings, including one just before my termination. Blackwood set down his cup with deliberate precision. You appear to have conducted quite the investigation in your first few hours as CSO. I admire thoroughness, though I wonder if your energy might be better directed toward securing the allegedly compromised technology rather than investigating company executives. Securing compromised technology necessarily involves understanding who compromised it and why. The who appears to include Harrison Pierce. The why is what I'm still determining. And you believe this connects to General Garfield and by extension to me? His tone remained pleasant, but the underlying threat was unmistakable. I believe there's a pattern that deserves exploration. Harrison didn't act unilaterally. He had support, both inside and outside Nexus. Careful, Ms. Wright. Speculative accusations against respected business and military leaders could be construed as defamatory. I smiled slightly. I haven't made any accusations, Mr. Blackwood. I've simply noted patterns of connection that merit investigation given the security breach, the kind of investigation the board will hear about this afternoon. He studied me for a long moment. You're either very confident or very reckless. Eleanor Vance may have offered you temporary protection, but boards have long memories. And longer reach. So I've observed. Though, in my experience, people who resort to threats typically do so when evidence isn't on their side. Blackwood checked his watch and stood. I appreciate your time, Ms. Wright. Our discussion has been illuminating. I look forward to the board meeting. As do I replied, remaining seated as he departed. Another small power move to counter his premature exit. When he was gone, I exhaled slowly. The confrontation had confirmed my suspicions, but had also escalated the stakes considerably. Blackwood wouldn't have personally intervened unless the situation threatened interests beyond Harrison's career. The connection to Garfield was significant, but how deep did it go? Back in my office, I found Marissa waiting with a thin folder. "You asked for background on Richard Blackwood's business interests," she said, placing it on my desk. "There's something you should see immediately." I flipped open the folder to find documents detailing an investment firm registered in Delaware. Blackwood was listed as a principal, alongside 3 other names. One jumped out immediately: Bernard G. Garfield. "There's more," Marissa continued. "That firm holds a 15% stake in Meridian Systems through a subsidiary." The pieces were falling into place. Not just corporate espionage, but a coordinated effort between Blackwood, Garfield, and Harrison to funnel Nexus's military technology to Meridian, likely for significant personal gain, regardless of the national security implications. "Marissa, get me everything we have on Nexus contracts that General Garfield might have influenced during his time at the Pentagon, and see if you can find any connection between him and our Pentagon liaison for Sentinel." She nodded and turned to leave, then hesitated. "There's one more thing. While you were meeting with Blackwood, someone accessed your personnel file using Harrison's credentials, which should have been deactivated." "What were they looking for?" "I can't tell specifically, but they spent the most time on the pages regarding your military discharge and security clearance." My stomach tightened. They were looking for leverage, something to use against me at the board meeting. My military record was exemplary, but my discharge had come after I'd raised concerns about intelligence being mishandled in my final deployment. Concerns that had antagonized certain high-ranking officers who preferred operational expediency over protocol, including, if I remembered correctly, a then-Colonel Bernard Garfield. The connections were becoming clearer and more disturbing. This wasn't just about selling technology for profit. There was something deeper at play, perhaps related to why that specific encryption technology was so valuable to begin with. "Have it lock down all access to personnel files immediately," I instructed. "And get me secure communications with Colonel Ramirez at the Pentagon. I need to speak with him before the board meeting." As Marissa left, my secure phone buzzed again with a message from Eleanor. "Board meeting moved up to 1 p.m. at Blackwood's insistence. They're bringing in legal counsel. Be prepared for full defensive posture." They were accelerating their timeline, which meant they felt threatened by what I might discover. In military strategy, when the enemy rushes an attack, it often indicates they fear their position will weaken with time. I had less than an hour to prepare for the board confrontation. Whatever Blackwood and his allies were planning, they clearly intended to end my investigation before it could expose the full extent of their operation. The question was, how far were they willing to go to protect themselves? Colonel James Ramirez's face on the secure video link was grave, his normally relaxed demeanor replaced by the focused intensity I remembered from our deployment days. The Pentagon's secure conference room visible behind him was deliberately sparse. No identifying features, no documents in view, nothing that could compromise operational security. "Morgan, your message said this was urgent," he began, skipping the usual pleasantries. "What's the situation with Sentinel?" "Potentially compromised," I replied, keeping my voice steady as I outlined what I'd discovered. Harrison's unauthorized access, the connections to Meridian Systems, the involvement of Blackwood, and, most significantly, General Garfield. With each detail, Ramirez's expression darkened. "We had concerns about Garfield's activities post-retirement," he admitted when I finished. Defense intelligence flagged several of his consulting arrangements as potential conflicts of interest, but nothing concrete enough for formal investigation. This goes beyond conflict of interest, James. They've deliberately attempted to extract classified encryption algorithms developed under military contract. That's espionage. Ramirez leaned closer to the camera. Do you have definitive proof that Garfield is directly involved? Documentation, communications, anything tangible? Not yet. But the pattern is clear. Private meetings with Harrison before. Key security breaches, financial connections to Meridian through Blackwood's investment firm, and now a coordinated effort to remove me before I can secure the compromised systems. You're facing the board in less than an hour? I nodded. They're bringing legal counsel, attempting to challenge my appointment and shut down the investigation. Ramirez was silent for a moment, clearly weighing various considerations. You need to understand something about Sentinel that isn't in your briefing materials, Morgan. The quantum encryption protocol isn't just another military communication system. It's the foundation for our next-generation nuclear command and control infrastructure. The implications hit me immediately. If compromised, it could potentially allow unauthorized access to our most sensitive defense systems, yes. Or at minimum, create vulnerabilities that could be exploited. He rubbed his temples. This is precisely why the Pentagon insisted on your involvement. Your security clearance gives you access to aspects of Sentinel that even Harrison couldn't see. Which explains why they needed me removed before they could complete the technology transfer, I realized. Certain modules would have been compartmentalized, accessible only to those with my level of clearance. Exactly. And it explains Garfield's interest. During his final posting, he oversaw parts of our strategic command modernization. He knows exactly which elements of the encryption system would be most valuable, not just commercially, but to foreign military interests. The full weight of the situation settled on me. This wasn't merely corporate espionage or even ordinary military technology theft. It was potentially an act that compromised national security at the highest level. I need something official from the Pentagon before this board meeting, James. Something that establishes the critical nature of Sentinel and reinforces my authority to investigate. Ramirez nodded grimly. I'll have the Secretary's office issue an immediate classification review order. It temporarily freezes all access to Sentinel specifications pending national security review. That should buy you some time and legal cover. Send it directly to my secure government email. And, James, thank you. His expression softened slightly. You took a career hit for making the right call once before, Morgan. I won't let that happen. Again. As the connection ended, I felt a complex mix of validation and apprehension. My earlier concerns about intelligence mishandling, the ones that had complicated my military career, had been justified. And now history was potentially repeating itself with even higher stakes. Marissa knocked softly, then entered. The board is gathering. Eleanor asked me to bring you to the executive conference room now. They're already in preliminary discussions. Who's present? All 9 board members, including 3 on video conference. Nexus legal counsel, plus an outside attorney I don't recognize. Harrison is waiting in the anteroom. They haven't brought him in yet, so they were keeping Harrison separate, at least initially. Interesting strategy. And Eleanor? She seems composed but tense. She asked me to give you this. Marissa handed me a folded note. I opened it to find Eleanor's precise handwriting. They've called in Judge Advocate Andrew Keller as outside counsel. Military law specialist. Be prepared for questioning on your service record and security clearances. Andrew Keller. The name triggered immediate recognition. He'd been a senior legal advisor at the Pentagon during my final deployment. Specifically, he'd reviewed my reports about intelligence mishandling and had recommended administrative resolution rather than formal investigation. His presence wasn't coincidental. Garfield and his allies were bringing in someone who knew the details of my military whistleblowing. I quickly checked my secure email Ramirez had delivered. The Secretary of Defense's office had issued a formal classification review directive for all Sentinel-related materials, effectively freezing any technology transfer and providing federal authority for my security investigation. I forwarded it to my Nexus email, then printed 3 copies before heading to the meeting. The executive conference room fell silent as I entered. Unlike the main conference room with its performative grandeur, this space was designed for serious governance. Functional, soundproofed, with state-of-the-art security features. 9 board members arranged around a horseshoe-shaped table, Eleanor at the center position, Blackwood directly across from her. The outside attorney, Keller, sat at an auxiliary table with Thomas Reed from Nexus Legal. "Ms. Wright," Blackwood began without preamble, "thank you for joining us. The board has convened this special session to review certain irregularities in recent executive appointments and security protocols." "Before we proceed," I interjected, "I need to distribute an important communication from the Department of Defense." I handed copies of the Classification Review Directive to Eleanor, Blackwood, and Thomas Reed. The tension in the room intensified as they reviewed the document. Blackwood's face remained impassive, but I caught the slight tightening of his jaw. Eleanor, by contrast, showed the first hint of relief I'd seen since this began. "This directive," I explained for the benefit of the full board, "freezes all access to Project Sentinel pending national security review. It specifically authorizes me, as CSO, to conduct internal investigation regarding potential unauthorized disclosure of classified algorithms." Keller leaned forward, his military bearing evident despite his civilian suit. "Ms. Wright, while this directive is certainly relevant, it doesn't address the procedural concerns regarding your appointment, which bypassed standard board governance protocols. The appointment was authorized through emergency provisions in the corporate bylaws," Eleanor countered. "Article 7, Section 3 specifically empowers the CEO to make interim security appointments when there's credible evidence of data breach involving classified materials." "The question," Blackwood interrupted smoothly, "is whether the evidence was indeed credible, or if it was manufactured to facilitate a personal vendetta against Harrison Pierce following your unfortunate dismissal." And there it was, the strategy laid bare. They intended to frame the entire investigation as my personal revenge, motivated by anger over my public humiliation. It was clever, appealing to natural skepticism about convenient timing. "The evidence was reviewed and deemed credible by multiple parties," I replied calmly. "But more importantly, the Department of Defense has now independently determined that Sentinel requires security review. That transcends any questions about my personal motivations." Keller cleared his throat. "Ms. Wright, your military record indicates a previous incident involving disputed intelligence handling protocols. Your final performance review cited occasional difficulties accepting command decisions when they conflict with personal judgment. Would you say that assessment remains accurate?" The question was precisely calibrated to undermine me, presenting me as someone who disobeyed orders when they conflicted with my personal views. I could feel several board members shifting their attention, suddenly more interested. "That assessment," I replied carefully, "was written after I filed reports documenting intelligence being removed from proper channels during a sensitive operation, reports that were later validated by independent review. Though administrative rather than criminal, action was recommended." I met Keller's eyes directly. "By you, in fact, Colonel Keller. Or is it Judge Advocate Keller? Your role seems to shift, depending on which master you're serving." A subtle shock rippled through the room. I had just publicly connected Keller to my military case, removing the appearance of his impartiality. "I served as a legal advisor on many military matters," Keller responded, his tone now defensive. "I don't recall the specific details of your case." "Then allow me to refresh your memory," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The operation involved surveillance intelligence being deliberately misrouted to avoid oversight, intelligence that was later found to have been shared with unauthorized defense contractors, one of whom reported directly to then Colonel Bernard, Garfield. The boardroom temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. This particular connection was new information even to her. Blackwood's carefully composed expression flickered momentarily, revealing calculation behind his practiced corporate mask. Thomas Reed, our legal counsel, looked between Keller and me with growing concern, suddenly aware he might be participating in something more complex than a standard governance dispute. "Ms. Wright," Keller began, his voice noticeably cooler, "you're veering dangerously close to discussing classified matters in an unsecured environment with unauthorized personnel. I've mentioned no operational details, only procedural irregularities that parallel our current situation," I countered. "And the parallel is striking. Intelligence being diverted outside proper channels, a senior military figure with defense contractor connections, and now the same legal counsel appearing to contain the situation." Eleanor leaned forward. "Mr. Keller, were you specifically requested for this board meeting? And if so, by whom?" A subtle but critical intervention. Eleanor was publicly questioning how Keller had appeared at exactly this moment. Keller hesitated just long enough to be noticeable. "The firm I represent specializes in matters involving military contracts. Given the nature of the allegations, my expertise was deemed relevant." "By whom?" Eleanor repeated more firmly. "I was contacted by Mr. Blackwood," Keller admitted reluctantly. Eleanor turned to Blackwood. "You brought in outside counsel without consulting me or the governance committee. That's a direct violation of board protocol." Blackwood remained unruffled. "Extraordinary circumstances require decisive action, a principle you yourself employed when appointing Ms. Wright. I merely ensured we had appropriate expertise present." "Expertise with significant conflicts of interest," I noted. "Mr. Keller previously made recommendations about my military case that protected certain parties from further scrutiny. His presence here today suggests similar motivations." One of the board members, Dr. Irene Chen, a respected computer scientist I hadn't met before, spoke up for the first time. "I'm troubled by these implications. What exactly are we dealing with here? Is this merely corporate misconduct, or something more serious?" It was the opening I needed, a board member requesting direct clarification about the scope of the threat. "Dr. Chen, what we're facing is multi-layered," I began, addressing her but making eye contact with each board member in turn. "At minimum, we have evidence of proprietary technology being prepared for unauthorized transfer to a competitor. At worst, we're looking at potential compromise of classified defense systems with national security implications. The Pentagon has made its concerns clear in the directive I've distributed. I deliberately avoided mentioning Garfield or speculating about foreign interests, staying focused on what could be concretely proven at this moment while establishing the gravity of the situation." "If I may," Thomas Reed interjected, his legal instincts evidently triggered, "the board needs to consider its fiduciary duty here. If classified technology has indeed been compromised, Nexus faces not just competitive harm, but potentially severe federal penalties, shareholder lawsuits, and permanent damage to our government contracting status." It was a crucial point. Whatever personal or political allegiances certain board members might have, their legal obligations to protect the company transcended those considerations. Eleanor seized the moment. "I propose we move forward with the following. First, we formally ratify Ms. Wright's appointment as CSO to eliminate any procedural questions. Second, we authorize her to continue the security investigation with full board support, with regular reports to the audit committee. Third, we instruct legal counsel, our internal team, not outside counsel with potential conflicts, to prepare for potential disclosure obligations to relevant authorities." Before Blackwood could object, Dr. Chen spoke again. "I second the proposal and request an immediate vote." Blackwood's expression hardened. "This is premature. We haven't even heard from Harrison Pierce, who deserves the opportunity to address these accusations." "By all means," I said calmly. Let's bring him in. A momentary silence followed as Blackwood realized the tactical error. He'd demanded Harrison's presence assuming I would object. Now he was forced to proceed or appear obstructionist. Very well, he conceded. Thomas, please ask Mr. Pierce to join us. The atmosphere shifted perceptibly as Harrison entered. His usual confident stride was diminished, his expression guarded. He nodded formally to the board, deliberately avoiding my gaze. Mr. Pierce, Eleanor began. Serious concerns have been raised regarding unauthorized access to classified Project Sentinel specifications. The board would like to hear your explanation. Harrison straightened, gathering his composure. I appreciate the opportunity to address what I believe is a significant misunderstanding. As department head, I have legitimate access to all Nexus projects, including Sentinel. Any review of technical specifications was conducted as part of my oversight responsibilities. Including the specifications you accessed at 2:17 a.m. last Tuesday? I asked. Or the encryption modules you copied to external storage devices on 3 separate occasions? Harrison's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. I occasionally work unconventional hours, as many executives do. And any file transfers were, for authorized backup purposes, following standard security protocols. Standard protocols require security documentation and dual authentication for classified material transfers, I noted. No such documentation exists for your activities. An administrative oversight, at worst, Harrison replied dismissively, hardly justifying this inquisition. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward the board. This is the access log, showing Harrison's credentials being used to download Module 7X of the Sentinel encryption protocol, the quantum entanglement authentication system. Below that is an email sent from an encrypted account registered to Marcus Ellison at Meridian Systems, referencing receipt of the package and confirming deposit to Harrison's Cayman account. Harrison's face visibly paled. That's fabricated. This is clearly a vendetta following my business decision to restructure Morgan's department. I continued as if he hadn't spoken. The third item is a meeting record showing Harrison at the Westfield Hotel with Bernard Garfield last Thursday, 2 days before my termination. Hotel security footage confirms their meeting lasted 97 minutes. Blackwood attempted to intervene. This is circumstantial at best. Meetings between industry executives happen constantly. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But communications intercepted between Meridian and their overseas partners referencing acquisition of S protocol via GP asset are harder to explain away. I hadn't revealed this particular piece of intelligence. Earlier, it came directly from Ramirez's team, who had been monitoring Meridian's communications once suspicions arose. Harrison's composure cracked. You can't possibly have authorized surveillance of Meridian communications. That would be illegal. I don't, I agreed. But the Defense Intelligence Agency does, particularly when national security technology is at risk. They've been watching Meridian since anomalies in their new encryption proposal suggested they had acquired classified algorithms. It was a calculated revelation, confirming that federal authorities were already involved without directly accusing Harrison of working with foreign interests. The implication was clear. This had escalated beyond a corporate matter. The silence that followed was deafening. Several board members exchanged alarmed glances. Even Blackwood seemed momentarily at a loss for how to respond. Harrison looked desperately toward Keller. This is preposterous. They can't possibly have legal authorization for that kind of surveillance. Keller, however, knew better. His military legal background would have immediately informed him that counterintelligence operations involving classified technology would indeed fall within DIA jurisdiction. His silence spoke volumes. Dr. Chen broke the tension. I've seen enough. I call for an immediate vote on Ms. Vance's proposal, with the addition that Mr. Pierce be placed on administrative leave pending full investigation. Seconded, added another board member quickly. Blackwood made one final attempt. We should adjourn to consider these allegations more carefully, rushing to judgment based on unverified intelligence reports. The intelligence is verified, Mr. Blackwood, I interrupted quietly. As I believe you already know, the question is how deeply you're personally involved in this breach. His eyes flashed with genuine anger, the first uncontrolled emotion he'd displayed. That's an outrageous accusation. Is it? Your investment firm's stake in Meridian Systems creates a clear conflict of interest. Your regular meetings with General Garfield and your intervention to bring in Mr. Keller, who has his own history, with these issues, suggest coordination beyond ordinary board governance. Eleanor seized control of the deteriorating situation. We will proceed with the vote now. All in favor of ratifying Morgan Wright's appointment as CSO, authorizing full security investigation, and placing Harrison Pierce on immediate administrative leave? 7 hands raised immediately. After a moment's hesitation, an 8th joined them. Only Blackwood remained opposed. The motion carries, Eleanor declared. Harrison, please surrender your company credentials to security outside. Your access is terminated, effective immediately. Mr. Blackwood, given the apparent conflicts of interest, I'm requesting you recuse yourself from all matters related to Project Sentinel pending ethics review. Harrison stood shakily, his career, and possibly his freedom now in serious jeopardy. This isn't over, he muttered as he passed my chair. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Actually, I replied quietly, I'm beginning to understand exactly what I'm interfering with. And so are federal authorities. As Harrison left, escorted by security, and the board members began gathering their materials, Eleanor caught my eye and gave me a small nod of approval. One battle won. But the war was far from over. Blackwood was already on his phone in the corner of the room, speaking urgently in hushed tones. I checked my secure phone to find a message from Ramirez. DIA moving on Meridian now. Secure all Sentinel data immediately. Garfield has been called in for questioning. The machinery of federal investigation was now fully engaged. Whatever Garfield, Blackwood, and Harrison had been planning, they had lost their window of opportunity. The question remaining was how wide this conspiracy reached, and whether anyone involved would attempt more desperate measures now that their scheme was unraveling. My new office felt like a command center in the hours following the board meeting. Security personnel moved efficiently through the building, implementing enhanced protocols while technical teams conducted comprehensive system audits. I had assembled a core team of trusted engineers to isolate the Sentinel encryption modules, creating secure backups while establishing exactly what had been compromised. The quantum authentication keys appear intact, reported Diane Way, our senior cryptography specialist. But the bilateral handshake protocol shows evidence of unauthorized duplication. If they obtained both components, they could potentially recreate significant portions of the system. I studied the technical schematics on the screen before me. Could they operationalize it without the hardware implementations? Theoretically, yes, Diane admitted. The algorithms themselves are the crown jewels. The hardware is custom designed, but ultimately replaceable. This aligned with what Ramirez had told me. The encryption protocol was the foundation for next-generation nuclear command systems. Even a partial compromise represented a significant security breach. My secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unlisted number. Morgan Wright, I answered. Morgan, it's Ramirez. We've detained Garfield for questioning, but there's a complication. He's claiming diplomatic immunity through his consultancy with the NATO Cybersecurity Advisory Group. That's absurd, I replied. Consultancy doesn't confer diplomatic status. Of course not, but it creates procedural delays. His attorneys are aggressively fighting our detention order. More concerning, we executed the search warrant at Meridian's headquarters, but their main servers had been wiped clean approximately 30 minutes before our arrival. I processed this troubling development. After the board meeting, someone warned them. Almost certainly. We're recovering what we can from backups and cloud storage, but they were clearly prepared for this. Contingency. Blackwood was on his phone immediately after the vote, I recalled. He must have triggered their contingency plan. We've subpoenaed his call records, but these people aren't amateurs. They'll have used secure channels, possibly unofficial devices. Ramirez paused. There's something else. One of Garfield's associates was detected attempting to access the Pentagon's secure server farm 2 hours ago, using credentials that should have been deactivated when he retired. The timing suggests they're accelerating whatever they had planned. My military training kicked in, mind immediately shifting to threat assessment and containment. What kind of access was he attempting to gain? Command and control systems, specifically the interface points where Sentinel encryption would eventually be deployed. It suggests they already have enough of the algorithm to attempt some kind of implementation. The implications were staggering. If they had operational portions of the encryption protocol and were attempting to access military command systems, this went beyond industrial espionage or even conventional military intelligence. This was approaching an active attack on defense infrastructure. We need to activate the security failsafes in the Sentinel protocol, I said. The emergency invalidation sequences we built into version 4.7. Already underway, Ramirez confirmed, but it only protects implementations that have been officially deployed. Any copy they're working with would be unaffected by our security revocation. Have you identified their ultimate objective? This can't just be about selling technology to competitors. Ramirez's voice lowered. We're working on several theories, none of them good. Maintain maximum security posture at your end. I'll update you as soon as we have something concrete. As the call ended, Eleanor appeared in my doorway, her normally composed demeanor showing signs of strain. The DIA has just served us with a comprehensive national security order, she said without preamble. They're taking control of all Sentinel-related systems and implementing military-grade isolation protocols. Good, I replied. That's exactly what we need right now. She closed the door behind her and took the seat across from my desk. Morgan, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Not the sanitized board version, the real situation. How severe is this breach? I considered how much to reveal. Eleanor was CEO of our parent company with appropriate clearances, but some of what Ramirez had shared ventured into classified territory. It's escalated beyond corporate espionage, I said carefully. The specific encryption technology in Sentinel has strategic military applications that make it extraordinarily valuable, not just commercially, but to foreign military and intelligence services. The attempt to compromise it appears coordinated and sophisticated, with connections that potentially extend to hostile foreign interests. Eleanor absorbed this with remarkable composure. And Harrison? Was he simply motivated by money? Most likely. His offshore accounts show substantial deposits coinciding with his meetings with Garfield. But Blackwood and Garfield appear to have deeper motivations. Their connections suggest a more complex agenda. She nodded slowly. The board is in emergency session now. Virtual meeting given the security situation. Blackwood has submitted his immediate resignation, citing personal health concerns. Convenient timing, I noted. He's attempting to distance himself before the investigation reaches him directly. There's more. 2 other board members with connections to Blackwood have also resigned. The governance structure is in flux. She fixed me with an intense gaze. The remaining board members have asked me to implement crisis leadership protocols. I need a trusted executive to serve as interim chief operating officer while we navigate this situation. I understood immediately what she was proposing. Eleanor, I'm focused on the security investigation. That needs to remain my priority. The security aspect is being managed by federal authorities now. What Nexus needs is leadership that understands both the business and security dimensions of this crisis. Someone who can maintain operational continuity while interfacing with the Pentagon and intelligence agencies. She slid a document across my desk. The board has unanimously approved your appointment, effective immediately. I scanned the resolution, noting the expanded authority it granted. Operational control over all Nexus divisions, direct reporting, line to Eleanor and the board, and explicit mandate to implement whatever measures necessary to secure company assets and government contracts. This is considerably more than an interim COO position, I observed. We're facing an unprecedented situation. Conventional corporate hierarchies are insufficient. Eleanor's expression was resolute. You have the unique combination of military background, security expertise, and intimate knowledge of our most critical technology. The company needs that leadership now. Before I could respond, my office phone lit up with an urgent call from building security. Ms. Wright, we have a situation in the server room. One of Mr. Pierce's former assistants attempted to access the secure area using what appears to be a cloned access card. Detain them immediately, I instructed. Full security protocol, no. Communications permitted. I'll be there shortly. I turned back to Eleanor. They're still trying to access our systems, even with federal authorities involved. Which only reinforces why we need you in this role, she replied. Morgan, you prevented this conspiracy from succeeding once already. Now we need you to ensure it's completely eradicated and can never threaten Nexus again. The weight of the responsibility was immense, yet strangely familiar. In the military, I had often found myself thrust into leadership positions during crisis situations, making critical decisions under pressure when the established chain of command had been compromised. I'll accept on one condition, I said finally. Complete transparency moving forward. No more compartmentalized information or hidden agendas at the executive level. If I'm taking operational control of this company, I need to know everything. Past defense contracts, current projects, foreign partnerships, everything. Eleanor didn't hesitate. Agreed. You'll have full access and complete briefings on all Nexus operations worldwide. She stood, extending her hand. Welcome to the real leadership team, Morgan. Unfortunately, your first task will be managing a company-wide security lockdown while federal agents crawl through every byte of our data. I shook her hand firmly. Not the typical executive onboarding. There's nothing typical about any of this, she acknowledged. I'll inform the board of your acceptance and arrange for the formal announcement to all staff. In the meantime, I need to interrogate Harrison's assistant and find out exactly what they were attempting to access in our server room. I gathered my security badge and phone. The first 24 hours of crisis response typically determine the ultimate outcome. Let's make sure we get this right. As I headed toward the security office, messages flooded my phone. Ramirez, with updates on the federal investigation, Diane with technical analysis of compromised code modules, department heads seeking guidance on the sudden security protocols. Each message reinforced the magnitude of what we were facing. This was no longer about my career or personal vindication after Harrison's public humiliation of me. It wasn't even about corporate competition or proprietary technology. We were confronting what appeared to be a coordinated attempt to compromise national security systems, with my former boss and members of our board actively participating in the conspiracy. The security office was a flurry of activity when I arrived. 2 federal agents had already joined our security team, their government credentials displayed prominently. In the interview room beyond, I could see a young woman, Alicia Mendez, Harrison's technical assistant, sitting rigidly in a chair, her expression a mixture of defiance and fear. She had this when we apprehended her, the security chief said, handing me a small device in an evidence bag. It's a custom hardware key designed to bypass our authentication systems, not something an assistant would have access to without significant help. I examined the sophisticated device. Military-grade technology. This isn't commercially available. That's what our technical team said, confirmed one of the federal agents. It contains encryption algorithms that match signatures we've seen in state-sponsored cyber operations. The implications were becoming more disturbing by the minute. Not just corporate espionage or even conventional military intelligence gathering, but potentially foreign government involvement in compromising U.S. defense systems. I entered the interview room, taking the seat across from Alicia. Her eyes widened slightly in recognition, then quickly narrowed. "Ms. Mendez," I began evenly, "you're in a precarious position. Federal agents are currently processing charges that could include espionage and conspiracy against the United States government. Before we proceed further, I want to give you an opportunity to help yourself by explaining exactly what you were attempting to access and under whose direction." She remained silent, evaluating her options. "Harrison can't protect you," I continued. "He's already under federal investigation, his assets frozen. General Garfield is being questioned by Defense Intelligence. Blackwood has resigned in an attempt to distance himself. The entire operation is unraveling, and right now, you're positioned to take the fall for much more powerful people." A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "I want immunity," she finally said. "That's not within my power to grant. But I can inform federal prosecutors of your cooperation, which historically has significant impact on charging decisions." She considered this, clearly calculating her limited options. "I was instructed to retrieve specific data modules from the isolated development server. Transaction records mostly. Evidence of who accessed what and when." Attempting to cover their tracks, I noted. "Who gave you these instructions?" "I received a text with detailed instructions and an address where I could pick up the access device. The message came from Harrison's private number, but—" She hesitated. "But you don't believe it was actually from him," I finished for her. She nodded. "The language, the technical specificity, it didn't sound like him. Harrison never handled technical details directly." "When did you receive these instructions?" "Approximately 1 hour after the board meeting ended. I was told it was urgent, that if the specified files weren't retrieved, everyone involved would face severe consequences." The timing aligned perfectly with Blackwood's phone activity immediately following the board confrontation. He had activated some kind of contingency plan the moment he realized the primary scheme had been exposed. "What exactly were you told about these consequences?" Alicia shifted uncomfortably. "That's the strange part. The message said if the evidence wasn't eliminated, the ultimate contingency would be activated. I assumed it meant legal consequences, but the phrasing was odd." "The ultimate contingency," I repeated, feeling a chill of recognition. In military operations, that phrase typically referred to the most extreme fallback position, the option of last resort when all other plans had failed. I needed to speak with Ramirez immediately. This wasn't just about covering tracks or destroying evidence. They had some final desperate measure prepared, and we had just forced them to consider implementing it. The ultimate contingency. The phrase echoed in my mind as I strode through Nexus headquarters toward the emergency command center we'd established in a secure conference room. Federal agents now occupied key positions throughout the building, their government credentials, creating an atmosphere of tense cooperation with our corporate security team. The normal buzz of office activity had been replaced by focused, urgent efficiency as everyone processed the gravity of our situation. Colonel Ramirez had arrived in person, foregoing video conferencing given the sensitivity of the intelligence. His uniform created a striking contrast to the business attire surrounding him, a visual reminder that this crisis transcended corporate boundaries. "Morgan," he acknowledged as I entered, his expression grim, "we've uncovered something disturbing. The activity patterns at Meridian suggest they weren't just attempting to steal the encryption technology. They were specifically targeting the authentication failure protocols." The significance wasn't lost on me. The override systems, the ones designed to maintain command integrity even if primary authentication fails. Exactly. In a nuclear command system, you need absolute certainty that authorized commands will be executed even if parts of the network are compromised. The authentication failure protocol provides that fallback certainty. Diane Way, our cryptography expert, interjected. It's essentially a backdoor, but a carefully controlled one, with multiple human verification steps built in. If someone could isolate and replicate that specific component, they could potentially inject unauthorized commands that would be treated as authenticated, Ramirez finished, creating the appearance of legitimate orders coming through proper channels. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the staggering implications. This wasn't just about stealing valuable technology or even compromising classified systems. It was potentially about gaining the ability to issue what would appear to be authorized military commands. This is what Harrison meant at the board meeting, I realized aloud. When he said I had no idea what I was interfering with, they weren't just selling technology, they were enabling something far more sinister. The question is, who's really behind this? Ramirez said. Garfield and Blackwood are American citizens with deep ties to the defense establishment. Their involvement suggests something beyond simple profit motive or even conventional espionage. What if they believe they're acting patriotically? Suggested Eleanor, who had joined us midway through the briefing. Rogue actors who believe they're serving some higher purpose through unauthorized channels? We've seen it before, Ramirez acknowledged. Officers or officials who become convinced that established protocols are insufficient for emerging threats, so they create shadow systems outside official oversight. It's dangerously misguided, but rarely starts from purely malicious intent. What about this ultimate contingency? I pressed. Alicia Mendez's instructions specifically mentioned activating some kind of final contingency if their evidence-clearing operation failed. Ramirez exchanged glances with his intelligence officer. We intercepted fragmentary communications between Garfield and an unidentified contact referring to a demonstration scenario if their primary operation was compromised. Technical details were minimal, but the timestamp on the communication was approximately 90 minutes after Harrison was removed from the building. A demonstration scenario, I repeated slowly. They've built in some way to prove the capability. Works. Something dramatic enough to force cooperation or compliance. That would be consistent with how these operations typically unfold, Ramirez agreed. When the primary plan fails, they need to establish credibility for their claims about what they've achieved, usually through some kind of controlled demonstration of capability. Eleanor looked alarmed. What kind of demonstration are we talking about? Surely they couldn't actually access military command systems without triggering countless safeguards. They wouldn't need to, Diane interjected, her eyes widening with sudden understanding. The Sentinel protocol isn't just for military applications. We've already implemented preliminary versions in several civilian infrastructure systems as test beds. My stomach dropped as I followed her reasoning. The Pittsburgh Grid Management System. We deployed a beta version of the authentication protocol 6 months ago as a proof of concept for civilian applications. A regional power grid would make a perfect demonstration target, Ramirez said grimly. Disruptive enough to prove capability, but unlikely to trigger immediate military response the way a defense system intrusion would. I turned to Diane. How quickly can we implement emergency override protocols for the Pittsburgh implementation? We'd need to coordinate with the utility company and get their operations team to accept an emergency patch. Even with federal authority backing us, we're looking at hours, not minutes. We don't have hours, I stated flatly. If they're moving to their contingency plan, they'll act quickly before we can lock down all potential access points. Eleanor stepped forward decisively. I'll contact the Secretary of Energy directly. We need federal emergency response protocols activated immediately. As she moved to a secure line to make the call, I turned back to Ramirez. We need to find Harrison. He's the most direct link to whatever they've planned. Already in progress. Federal marshals attempted to take him into custody at his residence an hour ago, but he wasn't there. His passport hasn't been flagged at any border crossings or airports. He wouldn't use official channels, I noted. Not if they've been planning this contingency all along. My secure phone buzzed with an incoming message from an unfamiliar number. The text was brief but sent ice through my veins. Rooftop. Now, alone. Or Pittsburgh goes dark in 30 minutes. I showed the message to Ramirez, who immediately began coordinating with his security team. It's almost certainly Harrison. We can position tactical teams at all access points while you meet him. No, I countered. If he detects any unusual security presence, he might trigger whatever they've planned immediately. I need to appear to comply while you work on securing the Pittsburgh system. It's too risky, Ramirez objected. He's desperate and cornered, the most dangerous combination. Which is precisely why I need to buy us time. I removed my official security badge and handed it to him. Use this to access all my secure files on Sentinel. Focus on the emergency override protocols we built into version 4.3. There's a master deactivation sequence that should work on the Pittsburgh implementation. Eleanor returned, her expression confirming she'd made contact with government authorities. Emergency response teams are being deployed to critical infrastructure nodes in the Pittsburgh region. They'll be in position within 20 minutes. We may not have 20 minutes, I said, showing her the message. I need to meet Harrison now and keep him talking while the technical teams work on locking down the system. Eleanor's face showed her concern, but she nodded with reluctant understanding. Be careful. He has nothing left to lose at this point. I took the executive elevator to the top floor, then climbed the final flight of stairs to the roof access. The building's rooftop garden had been a point of corporate pride. A green space 27 stories above the city where employees could take breaks amid carefully maintained plants and comfortable seating areas. Now, as the door closed behind me, it felt exposed and dangerous. Harrison stood near the edge, looking out over the city skyline. He turned as he heard the door, his once immaculate appearance now disheveled, his eyes wild with a volatile mixture of fear and determination. Morgan, he said, his voice strained. You actually came alone. More courage than sense, perhaps. I'm here to talk, Harrison. Whatever you think you're accomplishing with this demonstration, it won't end the way you're imagining. He gave a bitter laugh. You still don't understand what's happening, do you? This was never about corporate espionage or selling technology. That was just the financial incentive to secure certain participants' cooperation. Then explain it. To me, I replied, deliberately keeping my voice calm while slowly moving closer. What was the real objective? Proving a point that our conventional command and control systems are fatally vulnerable. His hand emerged from his pocket, revealing a small device with a simple digital interface. This contains the authentication override module extracted from Sentinel. In approximately 24 minutes, it will execute a precisely targeted disruption of the Pittsburgh Regional Grid Management System. To what end, Harrison? What could possibly justify threatening civilian infrastructure? To force an overdue modernization of our defense protocols. His voice took on a zealot's certainty. The military establishment moves at a glacial pace, ignoring vulnerabilities until they're exploited by our adversaries. Garfield and others have been warning about these specific weaknesses for years, but they've been systematically ignored. I was now close enough to see the device clearly. A custom-built interface with military-grade components. Exactly the kind of hardware a former general with defense contractor connections could procure without raising flags. So, you decided to prove the vulnerability by exploiting it yourselves, I concluded. Becoming the very threat you claimed to be protecting against. Sometimes the system needs to be shocked into action, he insisted. Controlled demonstration in a civilian sector ensures attention without risking military assets. Once we've proven the vulnerability exists, we can present the comprehensive solution we've already developed. And make billions providing that solution, I added, while positioning yourselves as the saviors who identified the threat. Harrison's face darkened with anger. You're still thinking in such limited terms. This was never primarily about money. It's about reshaping national security infrastructure for the next decade. The contracts would have been a consequence, not the objective. Noble intentions don't justify threatening civilian infrastructure, I countered, taking another careful step forward. Or stealing classified technology, or conspiring against your own government. My government has become dangerously complacent, he snapped, while our adversaries advance their capabilities. Daily? Sometimes patriotism requires working outside the system. I needed to keep him talking while moving gradually closer to that device. Every minute I could delay gave Ramirez and the technical team more time to implement countermeasures. Is that what Garfield told you? That betraying your country was actually serving it? General Garfield understands the real threats we face better than bureaucrats who've never seen battlefield consequences of technological failure. Harrison checked the device in his hand. 18 minutes now. Soon enough, everyone will understand the vulnerability we've been warning about. And what happens after your demonstration? You think the Pentagon will simply welcome you back? As visionaries? You'll spend the rest of your lives in federal prison, he smiled thinly. That's where you're wrong. Once the vulnerability is demonstrated, the response plan activates. Key officials in defense and intelligence have already been briefed on the contingency. They'll recognize the demonstration for what it is and implement the prepared response protocols. What officials, Harrison? Who else is involved in this conspiracy? People who understand what's really at stake. People who've been waiting for the opportunity to bypass conventional procurement channels and implement real security measures. His eyes took on a fanatical gleam. After today, Garfield's approach will be vindicated, and a new security framework will begin, one that anticipates threats rather than merely responding to them. I was close enough now to see the device's display counting down. 16 minutes remaining. I needed a different approach. Harrison, I've seen the federal response mobilizing. They're not treating this as a demonstration. They're treating it as a terrorist attack. Whatever back-channel approvals you think you have won't matter once the FBI counterterrorism units are deployed. Uncertainty flickered across his face. They wouldn't. Garfield has assurances from the highest levels. Garfield is in federal custody, being interrogated as we speak. Whatever assurances he thought he had are worthless now. This clearly came as a shock. You're lying. He would have contingencies, fail-safes. The DIA moved on him 3 hours. Ego. His diplomatic immunity claim was denied. They've frozen all his accounts and seized his communications devices. I was embellishing the details, but the core truth was accurate. Garfield was indeed in custody. Harrison's composure began to crack. This isn't how it was supposed to happen. The demonstration was meant to be recognized for what it is, a controlled exercise exposing critical vulnerabilities. It's being treated as exactly what it is, a domestic threat to critical infrastructure. Whatever narrative Garfield sold you has collapsed, but it's not too late to mitigate the damage. I gestured toward the device. Deactivate it now, cooperate with authorities, and there might be a path forward that doesn't end with you in a Supermax facility. His hand tightened around the device. You don't understand what you're asking. There are fail-safes built in. If I try to abort the sequence improperly, it could trigger immediate execution. Then talk me through the proper shutdown sequence, I urged. I have the technical background. We can ensure it's deactivated safely. Harrison hesitated, years of corporate calculation warring with the desperate reality of his situation. Why? Would you help me after what I did to you? Because innocent people in Pittsburgh don't deserve to suffer for your mistakes. Or for mine, if I fail to stop this? I held out my hand. Let me see the device, Harrison. For a moment, I thought he might comply. Then his expression hardened again. No. The demonstration proceeds. It has to. They'll understand once they see it. Who will understand? The same officials who authorized Garfield's arrest? The federal agents currently seizing Meridian's servers? They're dismantling your entire operation, Harrison. Panic flashed across his face. That's not possible. We had contingencies, safeguards. All compromised. Alicia Mendez is cooperating with federal authorities. Blackwood has resigned from the board and is probably negotiating his own immunity deal as we speak. The entire conspiracy is unraveling in real time. This detail, the mention of his assistant's cooperation, seemed to hit him particularly hard. Alicia She knew enough to try accessing our secure server using military-grade hardware on your instructions. Hardware that matches what you're holding right now. His gaze dropped to the device, then back to me, desperation replacing the zealot's certainty. If what you're saying is true, then I'm already finished. Not necessarily. I took another careful step closer. Preventing this attack is the one thing that might persuade prosecutors to consider leniency. The difference between being remembered as a misguided patriot versus a domestic terrorist. Think about your family, Harrison. Your future. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the facade of righteousness he'd constructed. For the first time, I glimpsed the frightened man beneath the conspiracy, suddenly confronting the real consequences of his actions. I never wanted anyone to get hurt, he said, his voice barely audible. It was supposed to be a contained demonstration, temporary disruption to illustrate the vulnerability. Then let's contain it now. Show me how to safely abort the sequence. 13 minutes remained on the display as Harrison finally extended the device toward me. There's a sequence of commands that needs to be entered precisely. One mistake and it executes immediately. As I reached for the device, the roof access door burst open. 2 federal agents in tactical gear emerged, weapons raised. Federal agents! Hands in the air! Drop the device! Harrison's eyes widened in panic. You said you came alone. I did, I insisted, but it was too late. Harrison's momentary trust shattered instantly. Everything happened in horrifying slow motion. Harrison stumbled backward toward the roof edge, clutching the device to his chest. The agents advanced, shouting commands. I lunged forward, desperately reaching for the device, my fingertips just brushing against it as Harrison's heel caught on the roof's decorative border. His expression in that final moment was one of utter disbelief. Not anger, not malice, just shocking incomprehension as he lost his balance and disappeared over the edge, taking the activation device with him. The sickening sound from 27 stories below silenced everything for one eternal moment. Then reality crashed back in, federal agents shouting into their radios, the distant wail of emergency vehicles, and the terrible knowledge that our last chance to safely deactivate the device had just plummeted to the street with Harrison. Spun toward the agents. We have less than 12 minutes before a cyber attack hits Pittsburgh's power grid. Get me to the command center now. Racing down the stairs, my mind calculated options with cold military precision. The device was almost certainly destroyed in the fall, but that didn't matter. It would have already uploaded the authentication override to a remote server programmed to execute at the designated time. Morgan, Ramirez called as I burst into the command center. Harrison. Dead, I replied grimly, and the deactivation device with him. We need another solution, fast. Diane was already hunched over her terminal. We've been working on a brute force lockout of the Pittsburgh system, but it's fighting us. The authentication protocol is working, exactly as designed. It doesn't recognize our override commands as legitimate. What about a physical shutdown? Eleanor asked. The utility company has initiated emergency protocols, but a complete cold shutdown takes nearly 30 minutes, Ramirez explained. We won't make it in time. 9 minutes remaining. I leaned over Diane's terminal, studying the data patterns flowing across her screen. The authentication system is looking for a specific digital signature. We don't need to break the encryption. We need to convince it that we have legitimate authority. My eyes landed on a particular code sequence. Wait, that's my personal authentication pattern in the system architecture. What? Diane looked confused. When we built Sentinel, each lead developer embedded their unique verification signature, a security redundancy in case primary authentication failed. Harrison wouldn't have known about that feature. It wasn't documented in the main specifications. I pushed Diane aside and began typing furiously, fingers flying across the keyboard as I constructed a specialized command sequence incorporating my developer signature. If my theory was correct, the system would recognize my embedded authentication pattern as having higher priority than the compromised override. 6 minutes. The command sequence was nearly complete, but uncertainty gnawed at me. This approach had never been tested in a live deployment. It was theoretically sound, but practically unproven. Almost there, I muttered, adding the final encryption keys. Ready to transmit. Ramirez gripped my shoulder. If this works, we've contained the immediate threat. But there will be others. Garfield wasn't working alone. One crisis at a time, Colonel. I hit the execute command. For several agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then Diane pointed excitedly at her monitoring screen. The Pittsburgh system is responding. It's accepting the authentication challenge. We watched as the hostile code attempting to penetrate the grid management system encountered my security override and began to disintegrate. 3 minutes before the scheduled attack, the malicious program dissolved completely, leaving the power grid intact and secure. The room erupted in relieved exclamations, but I remained focused. Implement the same security protocol across all. Sentinel deployments immediately, and get me everything we have on Garfield's contacts in the defense establishment. This conspiracy goes deeper than we've uncovered. 2 months later, I stood at the podium in Nexus's main auditorium, addressing the entire company for the first time as CEO. Eleanor had announced her planned retirement the week before, and the board had unanimously confirmed my appointment. The last few months have tested this company and each of us individually, I began. We've weathered a conspiracy that threatened not just our business, but national security itself. 8 people ultimately faced federal charges, including 2 former board members and a retired general. I looked out at the assembled employees, seeing both familiar faces and the many new hires brought in during our comprehensive security overhaul. But today marks a new chapter. The Pentagon has renewed and expanded our contract portfolio. Our ethical standards and security protocols have become the industry benchmark. And most importantly, we've rebuilt this company on a foundation of integrity. My gaze fell on the empty seat in the front row, where Harrison would have sat. In another life, another timeline. His choices had cost him everything, including ultimately his life. The final investigation revealed how thoroughly he'd convinced himself that the ends justified any means, a delusion that had corrupted his moral compass beyond recognition. Leadership isn't about power, I concluded. It's about responsibility. To our customers, our country, and to each other. I learned that lesson first in the Marines, and it has never been more relevant than it is today. As the applause washed over me, I thought about the strange, twisted path that had led me here. From being publicly fired at my own promotion party to becoming CEO of the company that had once discarded me. Life rarely follows the expected path, but sometimes the detours reveal exactly who we are meant to become.